Well, good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to this important conversation that we're going to have tonight. It's one of several that SPEA has hosted over the last few years in partnership with the city. So you might wonder what SPEA is. So we say the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, and my name is Tom Stuckey. I'm the Executive Associate Dean for the Indianapolis campus here. So again, I want to say welcome and thank you very much for coming. This is obviously a very important topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. So just a couple of quick things. They let me, as the Associate Dean, I'm allowed to give you the 30-second commercial for SPEA, so I'm going to go ahead and do that if that's all right. So the nice banner here, it says where community engagement is the lesson plan. We take that seriously. Community engagement for us is not something that we do, it's who we are. And providing students who then become leaders in the city with the tools that are necessary to help solve important public problems is what we do. And that's why we're here this evening. And so I want to thank you all for coming out. If by any chance you know anybody that's looking to expand their educational opportunities, we'll be happy to chat with you about that as well. I do have a couple of thank yous that I need to make sure that I make. First of all, I'd like to thank IMPD. Obviously, we have a number of IMPD officials here tonight, and Chief Roach, thank you very much for the partnership. And for the rest of the officers that are here doing the behind-the-scenes work, thank you as well. I'd like to thank the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and in particular, Alicia Collins for their support. Is Alicia, are you here? You raise your hand if you're, and she may be running just a bit late. And then also thank you very much to Eskenazi for offering the space up. This has been a nice open area to have these conversations, so thank you very much. I want to introduce Associate Professor Jeremy Carter, who is going to introduce the panelists and then also will be the moderator for this evening's discussion.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Jeremy Carter. I'm a faculty member in SPEA here in Indianapolis. I know it's dangerous when you let an academic talk, especially you give them on a microphone. So my goal is certainly to stay in the background here and moderate this excellent discussion that we're going to have this evening. The way we're going to proceed is I will introduce each person before they share their insights. I will let them give a background on who they are, where they come from, about their distinguished careers. Each person will talk for roughly 15 or 20 minutes, maybe a little longer depending, and after that we will open it up for Q&A, and we'll have a floating microphone for you all to ask questions and follow up on things you heard. As Tom mentioned, at SPEA, you know, we do our research to generate knowledge and do things, and while that's certainly the case, our goal is just to provide knowledge, and we think this is an excellent way to do that, to identify people and experts who are known nationally in a given area and bring them to Indianapolis and have them share their best practices, their experiences, and their lessons learned. And so that was really the driving factor for us and for CICF and IMPD, is to bring in some people that can really help us with some of the challenges that face the city. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Brian Roach.
Well, good evening. Sorry I'm here. This is the second time I've been here, right? So we had body-worn cameras. First of all, I'd just like to thank SPEA and IUPUI and CICF and everyone that, Eskenazi and everyone that allowed this to occur. Oftentimes, I speak a lot, unfortunately, about violence to different community members and also internally. And what I thought that I would do this evening is maybe, and as I look around, a lot of you are in the trenches and doing good work, and I've met a lot of you, and you're working on this problem as well as we are. And so you know the things that I'm about to tell you. But let me give you just kind of a view of where Indianapolis is and where our struggles are violence-wise, and then I'll introduce Shauna Majors, and she can tell you kind of her role. I've been the chief since January of 2017. I've been on the police department. I just started my 28th year. I was policing in the 90s and 2000s, where our homicide rate was very similar to where it is now. And then unfortunately, I'm policing now, where our homicide rate is back up there again. I remember when we did a lot of work late 90s and early 2000s with something called the Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership, that there was a report that was done with that, actually from Jeremy's dad, right, I think, or my mentor. Your mentor. It showed that Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership drove down some of our violence. At some point, we got away from that, and there's probably a number of reasons why our violence is up, and hopefully we'll have some of that discussion because we don't have all the answers. Maybe the panel does here, but I know I don't, and we're working towards that. This year, right now we are at 70 homicides. Those are criminal homicides. This time last year, we were at 54. In 2016, we were at 55. So that's worse than it has been the last 2 years. The hope that I take from that is those last 2 years, that first half of the year were pretty good comparatively, and it was the second half of the year was where we saw a spike, especially that last quarter. So if you were to extrapolate out these numbers, that 70 would end up at 140 criminal homicides. We had 156 last year. So I have hope that maybe some of the things that we are doing and you all are doing is having an impact. But we're going to continue to work hard and make sure that 140 is unacceptable. Our non-fatal shootings are up. Non-fatal shootings is very similar, and we treat it just like a homicide, but no one dies. Those are up also, and those are the things that we're focusing on, because if you look at those that are committing and their associates, the non-fatal shootings and also the victims, they mirror our homicide victims and suspects. So the thought is, if you can impact those non-fatal shootings, you have an impact on the homicides. In the middle of last year, we put together the Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership again. We brought all of the law enforcement agencies together. I see Chief Hoffman from Lawrence in the back of the room. They participate. We have probation. We have the prosecutor's office. We have all of our federal partners, FBI, DEA, U.S. Attorney's Office, ATF. And we have what's called task force officers that are assigned to those federal prosecution units. They are here. All of our district commanders have what's called flex teams, which are kind of problem solvers that are dealing with the narcotics and the violence on the individual districts. We have narcotics detectives that are involved at the districts and also at a mid-level, and also work with our federal partners. All of those people come together in a room every 2 weeks, and they talk about the non-fatal shootings, the most recent non-fatal shootings and the most recent homicides. And they identify the people that they think are involved, whether they were driving them to the hospital, whether they are in the car together, whether they live at the same house. And so we're starting to identify people, places, and behaviors, and seeing looking around the room at all the different law enforcement agencies and all the different units, and trying to identify who can impact that person the most. A non-fatal shooting, the clearance rate on the non-fatal shootings is abysmal, because people don't, a lot of those non-fatal shootings, they'll say, I was just walking down the street, right? And none of that information gets to us. And so they're not solved real well. So we're not talking about solving those cases when there's evidence and there's witnesses. We do that and we push forward with that. But it's looking at the people that are involved in those, looking at the other behavior that they may have, and trying to put a case on them. The thought is that we're saving their lives. Either they're keeping them from being shot, or we're able to get them in jail, where theoretically they might get some, they call it corrections, right? They might get corrected. It's been my experience that's been a struggle in the prison system and the jail system. The piece that we have been missing, and the other piece of reducing violence, is the community piece. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when we had the IVRP, the community piece, we had brought together, and we'd done a number of things with the community. Most of it was centered around wraparound services and trying to share those same names with our community providers, and then able to give some of those services in an attempt to get them out of whatever the behavior that they were doing. What happened was the community folks and the police started having that same meeting, and so the police stopped talking about information because they thought they were jeopardizing their cases. And the community, quite frankly, was getting upset because we weren't sharing information. And that's kind of been the demise of that Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership. So when we started to back up, I was very intentional of having the law enforcement piece, and then developing the community piece, and then having to build that bridge between the two so that that same information that all those officers were talking about every 2 weeks was getting to the community for them to get their arms around those same people in those same places and those same behaviors. We identified, and she's sitting to my left, Shauna Majors is now within the Office of Public Health and Safety, and she is the Director of the Community Violence Reduction. She's in the process, and I'll let her talk about that, of hiring some other people that are kind of boots on the ground that have kind of been there, done that with some of the folks that we're focusing on, and identifying their needs and trying to wrap their arms around them. Up until now, it's been hard. There are all kinds of, many of you are in the room, there are all kinds of organizations, all kinds of people doing great work, but it's not focused on the same people. So the intent is those people that we think are committing the violence that we are focusing on, if I can get all the different organizations to focus on those same people, then we're all working together in unison with the same objective and focusing on the same people. Up until now, that has been a struggle for me because I've got to talk to all of you and I've got to share all that information with you. And so it's been very difficult. So what Shauna brings is that bridge. So we bring Shauna in. Here's the same information that these officers are getting. Please pass that out to those that are that have the services that they need. And also, I think we're talking about, I'm a little fearful that we may be able to apply all the services around those that we're targeting, but I don't know that their hearts will change. And I really think what we're talking about is changing people's lives, changing their outlook, giving them hope, getting them to understand that they can be whatever they want to become. And that takes time, and that takes somebody to coach them and mentor them and spend time with them and hang out with them and give them direction. And that's difficult for a police officer to do because he's going from one run to another. Another thing I want to talk about, and you're going to have to cut me off because we just moved back to beat policing. Let me talk about that briefly. In 2012, our numbers started going down. Actually, that started in 2011. We went 3 years where we hired 20 police officers, and we lost an average of 55 to 60 each one of those years. So we lost in 3 years 100 police officers. Then as we started to try and build that back up, we hired large classes, but you got to remember those large classes are in some form of training for a year. So they didn't impact it, and we still have that issue today. With Mayor Hogsett and the City County Council, they have committed to adding a net increase of 31 officers each year. What that meant was in 2016, help me with the numbers, 1650, I think, is what we should have had at the end of 2016. At the end of 2017 was 1681. At the end of 2018 should be 1712. And then at the end of 2019, that number should be 1743. That's significant because I've been on the police department quite a while. I've been in a position in administration a couple times where I had the training academy. And it was so frustrating to go year to year, and any of you that work in an organization, not knowing how many people you were going to have in the academy, not knowing how many officers you were going to hire until late into it. And so that decision was always one that came, you know, halfway through the year. So it was difficult to plan for the training. It was difficult to staff. It was difficult to do any forecasting and planning. Now that we can do that, when we lost all those officers, we went to a model of what's called zone policing. So that beat policing that me and many others grew up with, where you had a small geographic area that you were responsible for, now became a large geographic area. And the officers began to play tennis. I have probably 10 years of officers who really don't understand beat policing. What I mean by tennis is they had large areas, and so they were going from run to run to run. The expectation that I think we have, that the public has of us, is that we get there quickly. And so you'd have officers go to a run and take care of the issue, and then they'd work their way back to the middle of that geographic area so that they were ready to respond to the next run. That became very apparent to me. I went out and ran an area over Christmas time. 2 rookie officers were running the same areas, and they said, "Hey, Chief, when there's not a run, we go sit over here in the parking lot." So number one, I said, well, you know, why would you tell your chief that, right? That you go sit in the parking lot. But I figured it out. So sure enough, we'd go on a run, and I'd go, and they'd be sitting there. Now, they were doing reports and talking about things, but that was the mentality. They're sitting there waiting on the next run to occur, and they wanted to be in a position to get there quickly. And so that's the mindset we're trying to change. So in April and May of this year, we just started. We went from 33 geographic zones to 78 individual beats. The reason the number 78 is there is because that's where our operational deputy chief felt like he could staff those all the time. So there was an officer. Now, they're still too big. And so as we increase our numbers, the intent is to make those beats smaller so that 78 may end up being 120. We're also in a technology phase here where we are changing our computer-aided dispatch out to Motorola. That'll come on at the end of the year. What that means is you have to tell the computer what car to send, so those beats will change again in 2019, and I think the Deputy Chief of Operations, his intent is to get the number of beats that he wants and that he thinks he can be most effective and put those in January of 2019. They may not all be filled, but that's now what we would be working to. So it's getting the map in front of the personnel, and then what that allows me to do is go to the mayor and the city county council and say, in order to do beat policing and in order for these officers to be known by the community and the community to know their officers, this is the number of police officers I need. And that's been a struggle over the years. So I mentioned beat policing because that's where we're going to gain more trust, more legitimacy. That's where the officers are going to start knowing their people. That's where the community's going to start feeling a little safer because they know who the officer is. That's where communication, I think we will make gains in communications because you're building that relationship. It's not just seeing the officer during a negative interaction. It's seeing the officer on the basketball court playing with a kid. It's seeing the officer in the house who's been there 3 times and knows the kids. Or knows the situation that the family is in, and allows that officer to make much better decisions, and it allows that communication and that trust to increase. So I've talked probably forever, but now in my partner and the person that, you know, I feel a great relief to be able to, as a police chief, you feel a burden, right? Those individuals that are killed, those are my responsibility, but they're also your responsibility, and it's great to have a lot of the information that I have and to be able to pass that off. So I'm grateful that Shauna Majors is here and don't talk as long as I did.
I will do my best. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shauna Majors. I'm a native here in Indianapolis. I grew up on the east side of town, 42nd and Post Road. And this is a large undertaking that I have taken on, and I'm excited for it because I think it's overdue that, and I'm happy that our mayor has decided to create this position and came up with his 3 points to address the violence in our city. I started last Monday. June 18th. And this week and a half has been real busy for me. I have been interviewing people for the peacemakers position, the resource coordinator's position, and I want to make sure I get the right fit, the right people doing the right things, that we can get out in the community and not just talk, but do some things, get some mentors hooked up with our young people and try to show them a different way to do things. I remember growing up, and we had Officer Friendly came to the schools that I went to. I'm a public school IPS kid, and Officer Friendly was an important thing to us because we only saw the police when something bad was happening, right? So to see an officer come in and kind of, you know, talk to us and explain what they do was important. And I think that that's important, and I'm happy that we're trying to get back to some basic things with law enforcement. You know, when you grow up in a home that is a troubling home and you really don't feel supported, you look for that support somewhere, right? Whether that's at school or in your neighborhood. And the kids in your neighborhood are who you bond with, you grow up with, and sometimes they decide to make different choices that you may or may not agree with. And I think that is some of what we're seeing, and sometimes people go along to get along, and I want to express to young people that there are alternatives and that you can be strong and stand on your own and make these better decisions for yourself and not have to, you know, quell a disagreement or an issue with a gun or any other kind of violent outcome. So, and being shot doesn't feel good. I can tell you that from experience, and that's not something that I would wish for anyone. It does a lot to the entire family. So you have 2 people or more involved in an incident, and so the person that dies, it affects their family. They have mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, cousins, uncles, grandparents that are hurting and feel that loss. And then you also have the person who did the shooting who now is looking at going away for a substantial amount of time, and it affects their mother and father and brothers and sisters and cousins and family. So I'm saying all that to say that this is a personal charge for me. I know there are people that have great ideas too, and I'm happy to hear those, and I hope we hear some of those tonight. I am open to working with whoever wants to jump in, because this is going to be an all hands on deck. This is not certainly we can't put it off all on the mayor or the police chief or myself or anyone else. It has to be all of us, because we are all here. We all live here. We all want to sleep well at night and not have to worry about, you know, is your kid going to make it home from that party? Or, you know, are you going to wake up and something in the neighborhood has happened? So I'm not Pollyanna enough to know this is going to happen overnight. This is going to take time. It took us time to get here. It's going to take some time to get out of here. But I think if we all do this together as one city, as we should, that we can make a difference. Also think that some of these kids feel hopeless, that there's no way out, that they don't see an end in sight for what's happening. And for me, I felt that way too. You know, I saw the gangs that I grew up around doing stuff, and people getting shot in front of me and stores getting robbed, and I thought, man, this is life. This is never going to be any different. But education was my way out. And college is not for everybody. But I think when you educate yourself to know better, you'll do better. You'll want better for yourself and your family. A lot of these young people that are being affected by this violence, they have children too. Let's break the cycle. When do we start? When does it stop? When do we as a community say enough is enough? I'm tired. I don't like seeing this. I don't want these kids, you know, parents burying their kids. We got to do better, guys, as a community, period. So I guess I'm supposed to go back and tell you now where I came from and what I did and all that good stuff. I'm sorry for the emotion. This is it's a big deal. I went to Indiana State University. I studied criminology. It's always been, I have family members that are in the life that do things that are not lawful that I grew up seeing, and I always just wonder why. You know, you always just wonder why people do what they do and what are the causes to make someone do something, and it kind of goes back to psychology, Pavlov. You know, if you don't have your basic needs being met, you're gonna do something to get it, right? And you know, especially if you're a provider for the family, you don't want to see your people hungry or the lights off, and I've been there, done that. And so that's why I think that it's important that it's a holistic approach. We can't just target one single thing and say this is the reason. There's a lot of reasons. And, you know, we've got, you know, family situations, interventions that need to occur, school interventions. We need stronger schools and better interventions there. And then, I don't know, my emotions are just all over the place because this is a deep thing here. But I just hope that out of this panel today, and I'm not going to talk as long as the chief did, that we can talk about some real things that can really be done. I'd like to see us clean up these neighborhoods. I was just visiting in a neighborhood the other day over by Douglas Park, and there's blight everywhere. You know, I'm seeing houses that are boarded up and, you know, graffiti on, and, you know, lawns are overgrown and streets are, you know, trash everywhere. And I think that something that simple, putting up maybe new street lights in some of these areas, I know that sounds simple, but that can make a difference, you know? Taking pride in our communities again, and stop acting like it's not, because it's not your thing, it's not your problem, right? You know, I remember growing up when Miss Rose next door would spank me with the switch and then walk me home, knock on the door and tell my mama, and she gave me some more. So, not that I think we all need to spank each other's kids, but Miss Rose didn't play, and I should have stayed out of that garden. But the point is, I think we need to be involved. And you know, there's such a heavy connotation around this snitching thing. And look, if you do something that's not right and has hurt someone, you know, you can't expect people to just to go down with you or keep their mouth shut for something that you're doing. So my goal with this new initiative is to get out in the community. We released a grant opportunity for community-based organizations to apply for. The deadline is July the 6th, so if you haven't got your stuff in yet, please do. We're going to vet those and get those grants awarded and get busy. I'm ready to go. I'm excited. I have all this energy and love to give people, and I think that's what it boils down to. We've got to love each other again, because if there's no love, there's no concern, there's no care. And I don't think that that's true of this city. I think we do care. I think we do love each other, and I think we will stand up and do better. So I'm anxious to hear what these other gentlemen have to say about what they are doing and what they've done and what they've seen, and I appreciate your time. I thank everyone for being here. I look forward to working with you in the future.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I have to stand up. I'm kind of like Bob. I'm looking at your heads, and I kind of want to see a little more of you. My name is Rodney Monroe. I am the retired chief from Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been in law enforcement for 40 years. I started with the Washington, D.C. Police Department, spent 23 years there, retired from there, went to Macon, Georgia, first time ever in the South, and what an awakening that was, but it's probably one of the best life experiences for me. I was the chief of police there for 4.5 years before becoming the chief in Richmond, Virginia. I served 5 years as a chief in Richmond, Virginia, and I've spent my last 8 years as the chief of police in Charlotte, North Carolina. I can honestly tell you this, that I have enjoyed every single day of my life as a police officer and a police official, because to me it was something that I believe that I was born to do. I can remember as a kid, I used to call the police on myself. Believe it or not, I used to go in the house and put a call that there's some guys that are standing on the corner and looks like they may be breaking into cars. Then I would go out there and just watch the police come and have conversations with them and whatnot. They would ask me, what did I see, and so forth. And then eventually they kind of figured out that I was the one that was calling them. And ultimately they took me on a ride along, and from that day forward I was hooked into law enforcement. I believe that in law enforcement, and my philosophy, my strategy has always been, it's about partnerships. It's about relationships. Anything that happens in life that's successful is based on a relationship. The more positive that you can make that relationship, the better results that you're going to see. So my strategy was rather simple as it relates to policing. How do I create these relationships? How do I create these partnerships? How do I, more importantly, how do I get the men and women within my organization to see the same benefits of developing those relationships? And first and foremost, I believe that if you're going to be a part of a community, you have to be a part of that community. And what are the things that you need to do in order for you, as a leader of that organization, as well as the men and women that work for you, how do you become an integral part in the communities that we serve? I think you've heard Chief Roach, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to circle back to give you Chief Roach and our relationship in the past and going forward. But how do you create those relationships? And Chief Roach talked about beat policing. That is the cornerstone of policing. We should not be out there just running from calls to call. We should be able to create territories within communities, because each one of us lives in a community, right? Every one of us lives in a community. And with that, we should be policing, our strategy should be centered around those community concerns. The more I'm able to put officers in a community for a long period of time, and not based on shifts, not based on days off, but based on the community. So what goes on in this community, those officers should be responsible for that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When you're off, you're responsible for what happens in that community, even when you're off. Being able to really understand the dynamics of a community that would allow you to communicate with that community, that would allow you to engage that community, to get feedback as it relates to how they want to be policed within their communities. I'm a firm believer that we should not be in communities telling citizens exactly how I'm going to police you, without giving you the opportunity to express what your concerns are within your communities. Because every community is different. Every community is different. One community, it may be something as serious as shootings, guns. Another community, it could be something as serious as traffic. And me as a chief or commander should not say that we may believe that one is more important than the other, but if you live in a community and something is affecting you, then it's just as important as what's affecting someone else in another community. So we shouldn't have an overarching strategy to say that we got to warn this, we got to warn that. It should be based on what's going on within your community. So what Chief Roach is positioning his department for now, to say that we're going to put people on beats, that you're going to be responsible for those areas, not just for the day work shift or the evening shift, but somebody's going to be responsible for that 24 hours a day. That's when you start picking up traction. That's when you're starting to better communicate with citizens for them to understand that you are a real partner within their community. That's when the information starts to flow back and forth and people have a willingness to want to assist you in addressing the ills within your community. You know, when you talk about violence, you know, something I recognized early that, you know, when someone is shot or someone is killed within a community, yes, it's a statistic for me. But more importantly, that affects someone within that community. Whether you're a mother, a father, a sister, or a brother, the death of someone at the hands of another affects you, and it should affect you. And I believe it's the most horrific thing that can happen within a community. You know, one of the things that, you know, that I understood clearly that, you know, if you've ever been to a homicide scene, you know, we put up that tape, and next thing you know, you have families and communities that all stand around that tape, and we all sit inside of that tape doing our thing, and it's a big disconnect from everyone. But this has happened in my community. How do we engage communities even from the perspective of something horrific that happens? And one of the things that we developed, and I started this back when I left DC, a homicide support group, where we brought in families who were victims of homicide and embraced them to the point whereby we meet with them monthly to talk about their case. The prosecutors are a part of that. We even changed the way that we processed homicide scenes. We allowed those families to tell us how it felt to see their loved one lay out on the street for 2 hours while we processed the scene. We changed that. Instead of processing outside in law enforcement, we process everything around that body until we get to that body. Well, victims, families of victims said you should start with the body. And that's what we did. You should be more diligent as it relates to protecting kids from seeing that body. So we purchased these fancy drapes and so forth, but our limit was that body was not to stay on that scene more than an hour. And we even made allowances that we would, when the coroner came and we took the body away, you had grieving mothers, grieving family members that wanted to say their last goodbyes, that we would go 2 or 3 blocks away and allow that family to have that personal viewing before they got to the coroner's office. But these were things that we were told by individuals who were family members were victims of homicides. Those family members then began to go around the city with us, talking to other families, talking about what the effect of being a victim of homicide actually meant. And then one of them came up with the idea that not only do we want to go out there and do that, but why not have the individual that may have committed that homicide, and those families began to meet with them. And we had a few of them that we made arrangements with the courts and the jails that also went out into community to talk about the effects of their lives as it relates to them being an individual that may have taken someone else's life. Those are things that start raising the conscious level of people and start allowing people to break down some barriers that may exist just based on the natural way that we do things, to see things a little differently. So I was never afraid to try something different when it came to how better to engage the communities that I've served. In Richmond, Virginia, we partnered with Boaz and Ruth. Boaz and Ruth was an organization that worked with ex-offenders that were coming out of, one of the things I've learned from them, not ex-offenders, but returning citizens, because they're coming back to your neighborhood, okay? They're coming back to your neighborhood, so why not look for the support system that may be needed with them in order to better indoctrinate them back into your community. We partnered with Boaz and Ruth. We began working with them. We began partnering with the city. We identified some housing. You talked about some dilapidated housing within your communities. We acquired a few of those houses. We allowed those individuals through training with other construction companies, Home Depot and others that built trades with these individuals, and they began to rehab some of those houses. They began to occupy some of those houses. 2.5 years into the program, I was able to convince a former governor who became mayor of Richmond, Doug Wilder, that we needed to do more. And we contracted with these same individuals with the city to provide jobs for them in order for them to cut grass within the city and to work part-time on a contracting basis with our Public Works Department. Almost half of the individuals that we brought in as contractors eventually were able to obtain a full-time job with those organizations. Getting over that hurdle of their past offenses, because not everybody that's gone to jail, that's committed a crime, is a bad person. We have them in our families. They haven't turned their backs on them. Why should we? And they're going to be here. So we need to find ways that we can help uplift them versus them always being seen as the problems within our communities. And again, I applaud Chief Roach and the city for recognizing that there are opportunities out there to work with these individuals, to not only be us against them, but how do we help you to serve the community that you're in. We established youth employment opportunities for young people. We hired every summer 100 youth within our city. And not to work for the police department. We partnered with various agencies, whether it was the YMCA, whether it was the POW program, or whether you had some other program within your organization where we would therefore fund that individual's employment for that summer, to give youth an opportunity to experience working. And it wasn't all just the good kids. You know, I think the good kids are going to be okay. They're going to be able to find enough positive opportunities to keep them advancing forward. But we have some young people out here that have some real challenges within their lives. It's our responsibility to identify and recognize those individuals, and it's a little tougher, because sometimes they may not want to listen, sometimes they may not want to do what's right. So it becomes a little more challenging, but we have to be willing to face those challenges in order to provide opportunities for those who may not ever find those opportunities. You know, Bob Woodson, who's on the panel, you know, he's the one that really got me to thinking about some of these things, and I don't want to steal Bob's thunder, but what Bob and I were able to experience in Washington, D.C. was nothing more than, I believe, a miracle, an intervention. And Bob will talk more about that, but I think at the bottom line of what I'm really trying to express, that we as a community, and especially law enforcement, is a part of your community, should be a part of your community, and you need to demand that they be a part of your community. We don't have all the answers. You know, Chief Roach talked about the sharing of information. 95% of what any police department does is gather information. And it's not secret information. Only a small percentage of what we do is actually secret, whether it's an undercover operation or whether or not there's a warrant that we're getting ready to serve or something like that. But for the most part, we take thousands and thousands of reports every year based on gathering information. And that should be information that we should be readily sharing back with you to help you understand better the dynamics of what's happening in your community. Most people are never victims of crime. They're not. But yet there are a number of individuals that may or need to be made aware of what's going on in their community to help further prevent them from ever being a victim of a crime. I have a lot of other thoughts and ideas and strategies and so forth, and hopefully we'll get into some of that with our question and answering period. But I think Bob has a very powerful story to tell, and want to make way for him. Thank you.
I'll take Rodney's place right here. I don't like to talk to people unless I see them. So if they jeer me, I know who's jeering me. My name is Bob Woodson. I'm the founder and president of the Woodson Center, an organization I founded 36 years ago in Washington, D.C. I come from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was the youth gang capital of America in the 60s. Part of my personal background, I have lost a brother to murder at age 29. He left 5 children, a 17-year-old niece who was raped and murdered on the streets of Philadelphia, and a 23-year-old nephew who was shot to death by a young man he grew up with. And the young man who shot him, his mother has to, and he went to jail for life. And those mothers have to see each other every week at the grocery store. And 2 other nephews who were assaulted and went in intensive care. So I have a personal reason for wanting solutions to the problems. Someone said if you want to go somewhere you haven't been, then do something you haven't done. Or if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. And so we really need to strike out and do something. So what I wanted to do is find out a real remedy for crime. First of all, young people between the ages of 15 and 23 are only 9% of the population, but they commit half of all the property crimes and about 1/3 of all the violent crimes. So we really are talking about a small cohort of people, and therefore we need to talk about how do we reach them. We're not going to do it by dramatically increasing the amount of police, nor are we going to do it by taking guns away from citizens. We must do something that we haven't done, and that is look within the community suffering the problem for the solution. And what I did was, this phone here, this provides about 60% of Apple's income over the last 7 years. They make, and this didn't exist 7 years ago. And because it took the imagination of one man, one person, to invent something that all of us use. Well, the same phenomena occurs within our social economy. Sometimes the actions of just one individual can have an impact of spurring a whole movement. And I'll give you an example in youth crime. As I said, my city of Philadelphia was a youth gang capital of America. Every year, 48 youth deaths. And for every child shot, there are 400 that are wounded. And in McGee Memorial, paralyzed. And so there was one woman and her husband, David and Falaka Fatah, who lived 4 blocks from my home in West Philadelphia, found out that their son, oldest son, was a gang member. He had 6 boys. So she said, well, why don't you invite your friends home? So 15 of them came in, but her husband, David, was an OG. Y'all know what that is, right? Old gangster. So he negotiated with the Moon Gang to let these boys through. And so she said, I don't know anything about gangs, but I know something about family, so why don't you all just move in with us? And she moved all the furniture out, and it's a small house. See, and if you're poor, it's a row house. If you're rich, it's a townhouse. And see, this is crazy. This is what an entrepreneur does. So she said 15 boys, 1 bathroom, 15 boys, 6 of my own. In order for us to get along, we've got to be clean, we all have to work, and we have to be disciplined. We must find a way of resolving our differences. So they did. And soon, within 2 years, those boys retired her mortgage. And then when word passed in the community that there was sanctuary, every day a young man would knock on the door saying they want peace in their life. So then, after another year, they bought the house next door. Then they bought the house across the street. Next thing you know, they got 6 houses on this little Fraser Street housing 100 boys. And they were gang members from all over the city. So she said, you know what, there's peace in this city, I mean our block, but not in the city, because the gang wars are raging. So these young men said, well, why don't we have a citywide gang conference that would bring all the active gang members together. Well, all the leadership, the pastors said, no, you can't have it here. This is crazy. So they had it. Anyway, the Quakers at 4th and Arch Street opened their historic building and invited them to come in. Well, it's on New Year's Day, and therefore the city canceled for the first time the Mother's Day parade. Because they said, you bring that many gang members together, it's going to be chaos. But so anyway, Sister had this conference for 6 hours. And these young men said, we are going to be peaceful. Anybody wearing a shirt bearing Sister Fatah's picture has safe passage. Because of the actions of David and Falaka Fatah, the city went from 48 gang deaths down to 2 in 1 year. And it was sustained over time. I was blessed to be able to follow her around and write down, chronicle what she did that caused these young men to change. I remember having a debate with a conservative economist who said, James Q. Wilson, if you increase the cost of crime, crime will go down. If you penalize the crime, it'll go down. And I said, well, no. I said, threatening these young men with death is like threatening a kamikaze pilot with death. Death is what they do.
Right.
You cannot bribe kids for change through services or jobs or education, nor can you threaten them with death.
Right.
What Sister Fatah did was help instill in these young men a respect for human life. She promoted transformation and redemption of these young people by recruiting those who had been redeemed to serve as witnesses to others to come and follow me. If my life is possible to be changed, yours can be. So she created a dynamic there that ended up changing the whole culture of the city. So then I knew what to look for as I left Philadelphia and went all over the country, and I looked for Sister Fatahs, people with the qualities of inspiring young people to change and become transformed and redeemed, but the qualities that make them effective makes them invisible, because they're not complaining, they're not demonstrating, they're not in the papers all the time. They're so busy doing their work, they don't worry about that. They don't seek funding. And so I was able to then go to different cities and find 10 people and brought them to the table. One was Leon Watkins in Los Angeles. His neighborhood was plagued by the East Side Crips, 62nd and Pico. They terrorized the neighborhood. Leon got tired of it, so he put wanted posters all over for the head of the East Side Crips. But he left a phone number at a phone booth. So he played games for about 2 weeks with him. Finally, he said, I'm agreed to meet with you. At 5 o'clock in this back alley in Los Angeles, the alleys are big enough so a truck can come through. So Leon is walking up at 5 o'clock. He said, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock. They had 2 carloads of young men strapped down, colors flying. Here's Leon walking up the alley toward them. And he said, I heard you looking for me. What do you want? He said, I want to talk to you about your life. They sat on a trash can for 3 hours. And the next day, he had that young man in Bible study. And then one week, he had the whole gang in Bible study. And the gang who was terrorizing the community ended up protecting it. Because Leon gets a call at 2 in the morning from Quake, the leader, saying, Brother Leon, there are 2 guys in here robbing our drugstore. What shall we do? Leon said, what do you think we should do? He said, I think we ought to do them. He said, no, we ain't walking that way anymore. He said, call the police. They were on the front page of the Los Angeles Times because gang members had become transformed from predators to ambassadors of peace. Those who were terrorizing the neighborhood are now protecting the neighborhood. And so I was able to, again, meet people who did the same thing Sister Fatah done. And so my organization is committed and was built on people like that all over the country who have been able to reach young people by challenging their moral decisions. So I call it character-based crime prevention. And so the key, let me give you an example with where Rodney, this man is phenomenal. Because Benny, I was able to take what I've learned, I wrote a couple of books about it, but I was able to train 5 homecomers, the Alliance of Concerned Men, right, Rodney? These are 5 men who had trust and confidence, like Sister Fatah and Leon, all over the city. And I said, well, you got the trust of the courts, the police, and the kids in the streets, but no one can measure your effectiveness, so why don't we concentrate it in one neighborhood? They said, well, where? And then Darrell Hall was killed. A 12-year-old boy was killed as a result of this gang area called Benning Terrace. There were 53 murders in the 5 square block area in 2 years because of the war and faction. The police were afraid to go in. And so I said, God has made the choice for you. Go bring the leaders of those gangs to my office downtown, that sanctuary. So they found out the leaders. There are just 16 of them. Brought them in separate vans, and they had bulletproof vests on, and we searched them. It's fine to be spirit-filled, Pastor, but not crazy. And they had bulletproof vests, and they had cars following the vans with young people who were armed. And Sister Fatah taught me that young people will fight when they're drinking together, but never when they're eating together. So I had a meal for them. Again, learning the lessons from Sister Fatah. So the kids said, no one ever asked us to be peaceful. So we said to them, are you happy with this crazy life of yours? And they said, no. Long story short, after 2 sessions, they agreed to peace. David Gilmore, the housing authority, was there. And he said, so he hired them to clean up the community they messed up. These young men, when they came to the streets, right, Rodney, hundreds of people who were afraid to use the streets poured into the streets. And we had a dinner at my place. I said, I want y'all to come to my banquet, but y'all can't come dressed like you dress. So I took them to Sims and bought suits for them. And so when they walked through the door, everyone gave them a standing ovation. There was a young man that came in, and I'm sorry it takes so long, but there was one young man that came in, and he was blind. And the kids were shocked because 10 years before, he got shot in the head, and his mother faked his funeral and shipped him south. And when she found out that there was peace, that's the first time they realized that he was not dead. And so we did not have, but in the process of turning around, Rodney, the kids said, well, the cops are now coming in, throwing us on the ground when they were afraid to come in before. I said, well, why don't we go talk to our area commander, Rodney Monroe. So Rodney had them in the room and listened to them like I've never seen before. So Rodney said, well, why don't I bring all my officers that patrol at the church for breakfast, and you bring all the fellas. So we had a 3 or 4 hour session, right, Rodney, in the church. Tension at first, but at the end, they were shaking hands because they understood police have the same challenges that they have. As he said, next time we roll through. The long and short of it, folks, is that we had 53 murders in the 5 square block area in 2 years. We went down to 0 gang murders for 12 years. So, but we exported those principles to the city of Dallas, where we hired local grassroots leaders that fit the profile of Sister Fatah. And they were the ones who identified what we call youth advisors, 8 young men and women who were put into schools to act as supplements to the staff because they know the young people. And as a result of them going in there, Madison went from 8 gangs and violence down to like almost no violence. It went from the most violent to the safest. And then we exported to the city of Milwaukee, where we started with 1 school 14 years ago. Now we're in 14 schools. We're able to reduce violence by 25% in 3 months. And the Baylor University studied it. And the point that I'm trying to make, solutions exist. But it doesn't begin with all hands on deck or more wraparound services. People have to be transformed, and they can only be transformed by people inside who know it. It's not an outside. Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church is such an entity right in your city. This man, Pastor Darrell Webster, does everything that Carl, Leon, and Sister Fatah did to promote transformation in people with his boot camp. Hundreds of people in this city, some of them are sitting right here, have been transformed and redeemed, and their lives now, they are ambassadors of peace. What you must do is what Sister Fatah, what we did in Philly, and that is to employ them full time to work within that zip code as moral mentors and character coaches to the kids so that they can redirect the young people. When you, let me finish by saying, how do you treat snake bite? You take some of the venom of the snake, right? Well, the same is true in communities. If you want to heal a community, go to two types of people within that community and begin to inside out. When a doctor treats you and you say you got heart palpitations, they don't give you a heart transplant. You start by strengthening the body's own immune system. Those immune systems are people. There are two types of healing agents in communities. There are those who were predators through God's grace have been transformed, and they can lead others to health. But there are people, families that are raising children that are not dropping out of school or in jail or on drugs. Right. They also are healing agents. And so what we must do is go to the 30% of people in those communities who are raising children successfully, empower them, and begin to build organizations, structures, and investment so that you can begin to heal the community from the inside out and from the bottom up. And when you do this, you'll have islands of peace. But it begins by going to an untraditional way to help people. And a lot of the biggest barrier we face is intellectual imperialism, I call it. Just believe that only smart people, well-educated people, have the answers to everybody's problems. And what we tend to do is parachute into those communities solutions designed by non-indigenous people with the expectation that people there ought to do. A.D. Gaston said it best. A.D. Gaston was America's first black millionaire from Alabama. He died at 103 years old. He had a 6th grade education. He said, it's better to say I is rich than I am poor.
Yeah, I see.
That a lot of people who don't say ain't eating. And so, folks, my message to you is that through Darrell's boot camp, and there are other programs probably, but the qualities that make a Darrell Webster effective also makes him invisible, because he's not out here tooting his horn. He's not leading demonstrations or complaining. You got to be like a Geiger counter and go in and find them because they're not looking for you. And once you do, you've got to begin to give them the resources, the recognition, the kind of cooperation so that the community can be changed. I can take you, if you want to see an example, write this down, go on 60 Minutes YouTube, write in the name Bertha Gilkey, 60 Minutes, and you'll see a community in St. Louis that was profiled for 23 minutes of Morley Safer. We worked 3 months with one of our groups that shows you how a whole community that was drug-infested and crime-ridden has been transformed to the point where there's market-rate housing built right across. You can have an island of excellence in your city. You just got to be willing to step outside and do some things you haven't done. God bless you.
Thank you, everyone on the panel, for sharing your excellent insights. And I think to summarize there, what you heard certainly wasn't a lot of, I didn't hear much, the police should do this, the police should do that. Certainly there are things that the police can be doing, but there's a large emphasis on all of us. There's a large emphasis on the solutions, especially those long-lasting solutions, are going to be generated out of the community. If you have any idea, any partnership idea, if you're willing to do anything, it's certainly important to come forward and talk to IMPD, to different services who are in the city, and explain what you're willing to do or ideas that you have, so we can start to identify some of those incremental things that could, as the time goes by, lead us to some very promising places. And again, it's as I'm sitting here hearing these stories and reminding and the role that everyone plays, and frankly, I'm kind of sitting up here wondering what I'm lending to the conversation. I'm thinking about the role of SPEA and the role of research, and certainly working with IMPD to try and identify what works and to implement and to evaluate and to have that evidence that shows, does this work or not? And I had an excellent, phenomenal lunch with Mr. Woodson today, and it kept coming up that we had these great things, these stories, these instances in which change has happened, but there was no backfill. There was nothing of where were the people that came to see, here's how you do this, here's how it works, evaluate it, get the word out, and certainly that's what we hope to do here in Indianapolis. The members of the panel have expressed interest in helping the city to do those things, to move those things forward, and we look forward to working with them. And it really got put into perspective for me about 2 weeks ago. And sorry, they gave the microphone back to the academic. 2 weeks ago, I was up about 5 o'clock in the morning, doing a bunch of analyses with data on a project with IMPD, and my 5-year-old was up early and came in the office at home, and I never think about the data when I'm working on it that much. You know, I think about it from a scientific perspective and what am I doing, what am I looking for, but I never really sit down to think about it per se in detail until my 5-year-old comes in and wants to sit on my lap and help me. And he says, what are you doing? I say, I'm doing math. And he says, what are you doing? I'm looking at these numbers. And then he says, well, what do these numbers mean? All right. And then it kind of caught me when I was like, I'm looking at the screen and I see, you know, homicide, aggravated assault, sexual assault. All right, and I sit here and I think to myself, well, one, how do you explain this to a 5-year-old? All right, and I totally beat around the bush on that. But it got me thinking about, you know, when you look at those numbers and you see these just data files in front of you, and you see numbers like 19 homicides in a given month. All right, you start to think about what that means in practice and what that means for a community. It really starts to sink in and think about how we all get on that same page to hopefully target these problems and reduce those numbers. Before I forget, transition here, I have to thank a number of people from SPEA that helped put this on: Michelle Soucy, Michael Jackson, Leslie Wells, Ninja Miles. I'm sure there's people I'm forgetting. They're the ones that put in all the hard work and the effort to make this happen tonight, and certainly the people here at Eskenazi. So we appreciate your time and efforts to make this happen.
Jeremy, I'm going to take a point of privilege real quick and say to you as a community, and again, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, so I have very little skin in this game. But over the last year, I've had the opportunity to work with Chief Roach. The Department of Justice has been here working with Indianapolis on a violence reduction initiative. And I have to tell you this, that, you know, you have a chief here that is willing to look at things differently. And I encourage you to take advantage of that, because it could change any day. He could be gone and you could have somebody else in here that may not be willing to listen and to try new things. So I think you need to take advantage of that and his willingness to look at things differently. We were on a call a couple of weeks ago, and yes, the homicide numbers are remaining the same as last year. But during our call, you know, it came out that the closure rate for homicides within Indianapolis has almost doubled. whereby more homicide cases are being closed. And there's a reason for that, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, I tried to prod IMPD to kind of touch what they believe was causing the increase in the closure rate. Now, as good as Chief Roach may want you to believe that his detectives are going out there CSIing and finding this evidence and that evidence and whatnot, that's not what's closing those cases. It's you. People talking, people having a willingness to share information, focusing on the right areas at the right time, asking the right questions. And again, it's about community engagement. That's what's different. The initiatives that he has brought forth over the last year, the community councils, the peacekeepers, these are thoughts that have generated in his head. And he may not want to take credit for it, but I believe that that is what's causing that closure rate to go up. And ultimately, and I can guarantee you this, you'll see a decline in the homicides over a period of time. So use this opportunity to continue that engagement. If you have those thoughts and ideas of how to better engage with your police department, I think you got a great chief and a great opportunity to see those things. If I've embarrassed you, Brian, I apologize for that as well.
Just one, but when Rodney was the chief in our, the area commander, our young people said, we try to get them to call the police instead of retaliate, because some of the people fired at our young people to try to get them to go back to violence. But what they did was call the police, and when the police did not write a report, I told Rodney, he called those officers in and said, go back out and write a report. So then when the man got arrested, there was closures of homicides because the young people said, we only trust Chief Monroe. They call you chief even though you're area commander, right? He said, and so we sat in our office many days and young people came in and shared with him who the perpetrators were. But that's the kind of trust that I think that the police department has to establish, and citizens will come in and cooperate.
Yes, I think it's a good time now to open it up for a Q&A session. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Kendall here will bring the mic back your way, and we'll try to work our way around. I'll let Kendall pick the first one.
Good evening. My name is Brandon Randall, and I'm the program director of the day reporting program we have here in Marion County. And what I wanted to ask the panel, so I work with young men who are currently under supervision of juvenile court. In the last year, we've served 135 young people. And so I get to work with them for 40 hours a week. So when we look at initiatives that are being suggested, such as workforce development, a lot of education, what we're not hearing, which I thank you, Mr. Woodson, for bringing it up, is the relationships. So the kids I work with, I get to see them outside of their charges. I get to see them as the kids who want to play Madden and love to color and draw all over our stuff. But we're not talking about how to build relationships with them. One of my students knew 3 of the 3 homicides over the last 2 days. So they're dealing with trauma while still having to abide by juvenile court requirements. So when we look at relationships, we look at trauma, what is the city doing to address trauma and help with the healing process, but also amplifying their voices? I think there should have been a young person on the panel tonight as we're talking about youth development strategies, but ain't no youth here. So I think that we need to find a way to make that happen. But as far as the relationships and the addressing trauma, what is the mayor's office and IMPD doing?
So Brandon, not well. You know that trauma is something that at least us within the police department are just now figuring out, right? Unfortunately, 2 years ago, I participated and IPS was putting together some mental health training for all the administrators and teachers and everyone. A year later, I came back, and they were talking about the successes of it, and I talked to a principal that has an elementary school over at 42nd and Post. And as we were talking about how the mental health training went, what came out was that all the trauma that those kids are seeing. So you look at the kids that aren't doing well or not showing up for school, it's because of what happened the night before, or what they saw, or it was, unfortunately, uncle got shot out in the corner. So a lot of that is mental health. We're training our officers around how do you recognize that, so when they're engaging people that are struggling and maybe they aren't complying because of mental health reasons or just can't control their anxiety or whatever that is. We're doing some of that within the police department. I think probably the more important thing is as Shauna gets her feet under her and starts looking at those that are applying for some of these dollars, I think all of us hit on that, and then you brought it up too. It's those relationships. It's people like you that how do we find all those, right, that are actually engaging and have the time to engage and developing those relationships so that they can identify what are those needs, right? So they can identify that there's some trauma going on here, and then where are those resources, where can I take them to? And, you know, we struggle with that as a city. I can't talk for the mayor's office, only as a police department, but we've had those discussions. The more and more we deal with people with trauma and mental illness and substance abuse, the more and more we find out that the opportunities for them to get help are less and less. And so it's those kind of things that we need to work on, and it's identifying people like you, Brandon, and Pastor Webster and others here that actually spend time developing those relationships. And that's what we're talking about, those same people that we're focused on, that we have a list of, that are committing the violence. It's those people that someone has to build a relationship with in order to save them.
You know, a lot of times, you know, police are asked to be and do everything, and we can't. Although we would like to put on that, you know, blue and red and yellow cape and go out and do it, we can't. And I believe it's incumbent upon all of us in different areas. And, you know, you mentioned about the trauma. And I believe that those that have the ability to capture youth in their environment, so whether it's through probation, you know, and a real logical question to ask is, can your organization, because of the fact that you have those youth there, provide that resource to those youth while they're right there with you 40 hours a week in dealing with the trauma that they're experiencing? Asking IMPD to do it on a case-by-case basis would not be as beneficial than it would be for any organization that's working with a cadre of youth that is experiencing that dynamic. Now, we may be able to help link that resource, but I think if you capture those youth with your program or your engagement, then it's incumbent upon us to try to help find those resources to bring to you to help address those particular issues.
We should be asking that question.
Exactly.
What do you need?
Exactly.
Hello, my name is LaShawna Triplett, and I have a grassroots organization. And I first want to commend Mr. Woodson for enlighten the community on what works. And it's the grassroots programs that are invisible. Brandon asks, well, how is Indiana dealing with trauma? I've been invited by Indy Heartbeats, and our organization provides the academic components to youth that are expelled and suspended from school to keep their academic components going in a non-traditional setting, in a home environment that gets them out of the large traditional setting, and we provide mentoring and life skills and trades as well. Indy Heartbeat, we had a small grant that we was awarded, and I opened the opportunity up for Indy Heartbeats, and they've sent us, we call them our little test pool of youth that we've been working with, and building the relationships with the youth. in establishing something meaningful, whereas Indie Heartbeats, Mr. Tyrone had wisdom enough to know some of these youth we are not meeting. We are not being able to reach. So he reached out to some grassroots programs who are in the streets and working and building relationships. And he had the pleasure of coming to see one of the youth that was actually dropped from their program because he wasn't engaging, actually was able to re-engage because we formed a meaningful relationship with him where he was able to display some of his music talent and abilities. So my question is, when we have grants, the Department of Education has a program called Prevention, and we're offering what works. And in the prevention dollars, the grant is not as strategic and the qualifications has been brought down, where grassroots invisible programs are able to apply for it and still bring those resources and funding. Because although I may own my own business, if I ask someone else to come along, they're going to want to get paid. So for the city, the grant, I saw the grant is awesome, but what can we do for organizations who are invisible, who don't have a budget, who don't have a grant writer to be able to write and formulate a grant that is feasible for the grassroots programs who have been working in the communities still be able to survive and bring more in? As Mr. Woodson say, it does work, and we are working, but because we're not on the news and because we don't have the fancy names, then we're not getting the resources, and a lot of times we can't even get into the offices to speak with the powers and positions to be able to say, hey, this is working. Here's a group of children that it has worked for. So how can the city help the grassroots programs? Thank you.
Ms. Triplett, thank you for your question. With this particular grant that I was speaking about, I want the invisible grant grassroots organizations to apply for this grant. You don't have to be a grant writer by trade to write a good grant. I know that there are several organizations that offer grant writing workshops. I know CICF does some of that, and as well as United Way. So I encourage you. You can call me. I've sat down with several people that had questions about the grant and specifics so that they could understand better how to put it together. So I have no problem helping do that. And I met with a group that came up this week that we talked about that. So I just want to offer you my service to help you with any questions that you have, for sure. But you do not have to be a professional grant writer. My recommendation is to take the RFP apart piece by piece and make sure you're addressing each piece that is asked to be addressed, and submit that. And hold on.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is provide technical assistance to groups. And I've had a funder call me and said, Bob, I met these great people doing things, and I asked them for a proposal, but I can't submit this to my board. So I said, well, then assign the writer to go and meet with them, interview them, record their thing, and then you let them write the proposal. So there are creative ways that you can get churches have people who want to volunteer. Let some come and sit with these groups, tape interviews, let them tell you all they're doing, and let someone who is skilled at writing it up do that. So that's just a small thing. Daryl?
I'm gonna hold them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we talked a little bit about creating trust between police officers and the communities they police. I guess I have a few questions about that. It sounds like you're going to increase the number of bullies in the neighborhood before you ask the community if that's what they want. And I'm wondering, I guess, like, what the police are doing to kind of talk to each other about their really long history of violence in the United States, and especially within the city, and how that comes out into the streets in the form of police violence or increasing fear and anxiety within communities. Like, what's going on in the police department to reform cop culture?
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So a lot of questions there. and we've had these conversations before. We're doing everything we can. We have a Citizens Police Complaint Board that you complain to that sits outside of the police department. They meet with me once a month. They have the ability to change the way we respond or the way that we've viewed or made a decision on a particular case. The uses of force cases here in Indianapolis, and if you look at the number of interactions that people have with officers, that's very minimum when they use force. We're not putting more officers out on the streets. I'm using the same officers I have and trying to put them in smaller geographic areas. We're doing everything that we can in order to engage the community. We can always do better. This morning I just spent time where you had 2 officers on the North District that 2 years ago started a bike park at their own expense, something they were passionate about, pulled in kids. I don't know if Malachi Walker's here, but they just rode their bikes from their church in their youth program for the opening of that. We got grants, $50,000 grant to build a pump track so that officers and kids could ride together. We have a PAL program. We're doing everything we can. This beat policing allows officers to engage more and to help build that trust. So we're trying to connect. We want to be part of the community, and we are part of the community, and we want to have a better relationship. And I think we have a great relationship in a lot of places, and it disappoints me that we're viewed sometimes in some areas as bullies. And we will do everything we can in order to impact that. But minds have to change on both sides. We started teaching several years ago in our academy, and we do it in our leadership academy also, and we do it with our new supervisors. It doesn't matter the situation, you take care of business, but people are still people, and you got to recognize them as people. They're not heroin addicts, they're not black people, they're not Hispanic people, they're not burglars, they are people, right? They have value and characteristics, and when the moment is over, you should treat them like people. And so we're really drive that home. That's communicated throughout the department. And we see commendations all the times of officers that really view people as people. We have a great partnership with Gleaners, who is here, where officers can recognize those basic needs of food. And then we've given those opportunities to the officers through Gleaners, where they have non-perishable goods in the back of their trunks and can pass those out. 6 days a week or 5 days a week, we are with Gleaners delivering food out into the community. So we're doing everything that we can, and are happy to sit down with those communities that think we are bullies and see how we can rectify that and both get on the same page.
Thank you. I just wanted to say quickly, again, thank you, Chief, first of all, for not just your passion, but being willing to back up your passion with participating with local grassroots groups. Secondly, we do have a problem in our city, but our city could be worse if it wasn't for grassroots people. Today we're looking at information, and we know information informs. But then this gathering is to bring about collaboration. How do we come together and point to solutions? The chief said something, and this is my passion. I flew back from Dallas, Texas, where I was there doing boot camp training, and we've set up boot camps in several cities across the state of Indiana. And the district attorney office just in Shreveport just picked up one of my boot camps, and they're going to do their program as a diversion piece. I really believe in Bob Woodson. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. But the chief came to my boot camp. I just did a focus on the fathers boot camp in Saving Our Sons. And we see 100 to 300 males and boys at 5:45 a.m. in the morning. And when we started this program, we started it for fathers, but mothers started bringing their sons before school. And Bob said it best, I don't call the news, I don't toot my own horn, but one thing we can do is point to witnesses. Witnesses trump arguments about who's changing and who's not changing. And Julian Grace just did a story on the boot camp last week. My brother was killed in 1989 in Hallville, a case of mistaken identity. I had another brother who was stabbed in the prison system and died. So I know violence very well. But what I didn't let violence do is make me bitter. I let it make me better. And I think if we're going to continuously look for solutions, sometimes our losses need to become lessons. How do we learn from our losses, and what lessons do we learn? So what we're doing just this month alone, we were talking about trauma, but let me tell you another thing that I'm finding out that's impacting our community, is what social workers call unresolved issues. And I lectured about 5 years ago with Dr. Lorraine Blackman, the black PhD at this university, because she was dealing with fathers in the prison system, and she was trying to figure out how could I get that many men to come at 5:45 a.m. in the morning, and they was paying her to deal with fathers, and I wasn't paying them. It's because there are unresolved issues in the life of young boys. We're in School 99, and we deal with young kids. We were in there about a month ago, and I walked in, and there were kids turning over tables and throwing chairs. And I began to find out that daddy was not in the home. The problem of our communities is the problem of our families. And sometimes we treat symptoms and don't touch sources. The chief said it best, and I don't know that we miss it, he said, but he thinks it's a transformation of heart. Programs don't change people, they help people, but they don't change people. And when we deal with all of these unresolved issues of children, so what the camp is doing, I got guys who are ex-murderers in my camp. I had guys who told me they've sold more drugs than I have pews in my church. And when the chief came to boot camp, they were all quiet. They normally talk, but they didn't say anything because they thought he was going to lock them up. There are practitioners in this room, from Anthony Beverly to Darnell Howard and other guys who are grassroots people. Now, I want to say something that's very, very important. Sometimes academicians say that we don't have measurable outcomes. We can't measure transformation, but we can point to witnesses who've been changed. Kurt Moore, who did 13 years in the penal system, who came out and started washing cars. And now he has a mentoring group called Straight Up Mentoring in Arlington High School, where he sees several hundred boys. He doesn't have a narrative, but he do have witnesses. And so I'm really grateful for this collaboration and conversation to talk about what can we do together that we can't do apart. I know we have political problems, but we really have a people problem. And sometimes we get so caught up on the political that we miss the people. And I'm here saying, hey, we know the stats, but I can point to solutions. And if you want to point to solutions, I think that if we all come together, we can do something powerful together that we can't do apart. And that's change our community one person at a time from the inside out.
Trade in a lot of ways has played a major role on a lot of the homicides that go on in the city. I personally think people deal in drugs because they feel like, those are the only opportunities that they have. The communities that seem to have the most violence seem to also be the communities that have been neglected the most by the city when it comes to opportunity, resources, and education. And so I think, I guess my question is, how does the city, plan on increasing opportunities and bettering the education of these communities so they can become places and be transformed into places where these kinds of things don't happen? because obviously they don't happen, in all parts of the city. So I think, so yeah, so that's
So I think what you expressed is exactly what we're saying, right? It's in communities. It's not in all communities. The drug trade is significant, and it's because there's no other options. It kind of goes to some of the things that have been said, that they don't see their future, right? That's all they know, and that's what they think life is about. And so what we're trying to do, and so I know where those areas are, right? I know who those people are, and I know what those behaviors are. I need to get that to the people that can change those lives. At the same time, all the city resources need to be focused on those same areas. We probably should have a city county council on this, because I'm just the chief of police. But all of you have city county councilors, and you have state representatives, and everyone is vying for the same amount of money within the budget. And if we could get everybody together to focus on those neighborhoods where the greatest problem is, I think it's a win for everyone, right? If you want people to come to your city and visit your city and spend money in your city, and you want your city to grow, when they see those 156 homicides in 2017, that impacts everyone. And so if everyone could get together and focus those dollars and those city resources and all of your resources in those same areas, and so what you've articulated is where we're trying to go. And I wish I could control all of that, but that's where I find the difficulty. I can control the police department, and what I'm doing is reaching out to those that can control the community, put it in the right place, and at the same time I'm having these conversations with different counselors in the mayor's office.
That's a question done? Okay. I want to make one statement, then I've got a question. I think we need to stop depending on churches to help, because there was 9 people who got shot up in the church at Charleston 9. So I think we need to stop depending on only churches to help us, because that still hasn't solved anything. There's still homeless people sleeping on the side of the church. There are still people who are hungry. Indianapolis is still #1 for food deserts in the United States. So I just want to say that. Second off, this is to the chief. Do you know why black and brown people don't trust the police? Do you honestly know? Do you honestly know the systemic racism that we have to deal with when the police come by? When you said, when Chief came by and all the black kids basically was quiet, that's a problem. And that's an issue we need to recognize, that there is a problem with our police officers over-policing black and brown communities. There is people, I don't trust the police at all. I don't. And I probably never will, because of things that I've been through and I've seen my friends been through. Have you listened to the stories of black and brown people? Have you watched the Khalif Browder story? Have you watched 13th? Have you watched Sandra Bland? Have you watched Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was 7 years old, who was killed in her home? Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old. Here's a list of names. We have to recognize the systemic problem. There is a problem. And we keep talking about, oh, let's do the church, let's do this, let's pray. That is not helping. What else can we do? Not as a people, as a political, because political powers, what else can we do besides these same old rundown excuses that we have, the same old rundown solutions that we have, blaming black people, black on black crime. You guys keep on blaming black people for crime. What else are we doing? What are we doing to solve that crime? Why is there not a grocery store, but a Walgreens and a liquor store?
Okay, let's let him answer.
I just wanted to say, I'm going to give it to the chief. A great question, but I'll give it to the chief. But I want to say this. I still think you remove the church, because the church, you got to remember, was historical for credit unions, historical for HBCUs. Okay, so you can't say remove the church. Secondly, I want to say this. We don't stop going to the grocery store when there's a problem. We don't stop going to work when there's a problem. So, I'm not trying to defend the police, but all police are not bad. Okay, second, I want to say real quick, I want to say secondly, just like all people are not bad, I want to say secondly, as I speak to your problem, even though there's food deserts, listen, there's responsibility that we have to take on our own. There's a food desert in 46218, but watch this. My church opens up a food pantry every Friday morning and feed people. Now, all I'm saying is this. We have to be part of the solution. It's a great question, and I'm not chastising you. I'm going to let the chief answer that question. But all I'm saying is this. I want to be part of the solution, even though we can point to the problem. And there are a lot of practitioners in this room that are part of that solution. Great question. Now I'll give it to the chief, and I won't talk no more.
Well, so I do understand that there's that feeling. You know, it breaks my heart to talk to African-American females who have sons that are afraid when they get pulled over by the police department. So, and so I get that, and so I can tell you that I care all day long, but I've got to show it, and the officers have to show it, and the only way to do that is one incident at a time. And I've never been in your shoes, haven't walked in your shoes, but I think I understand to the extent I can, and understand what it is we can do in order to help assist that.
Hi, my name is Kate Elstein. I'm new to Indianapolis. I just moved here about 3 months ago, so I do feel, I feel nervous actually to be speaking in this room right now. I feel grateful to everything that you all have said and a lot of the questions that have been asked as well. Something that's come up a lot tonight is this idea of building relationships and also this idea of transformation. And I feel like the most transformative relationship that each individual can be a part of is our relationship to ourselves. So if y'all don't mind, I'd like to spend just about like 1 minute guiding us through just a bit of really being in the body and feeling ourselves. And then pose the question. Is that okay? Let's go with the question. Okay, sorry. I listened to the pastor, and he said some losses take as lessons, so that was a loss, so I'll take the lesson. The question has to do with trauma and how trauma is actually processed in the body. My transformative relationship with myself has been guided through the practice of yoga and meditation. And I'm wondering if there's any room for both police officers and within communities for offerings of yoga and meditation.
So we have a unit within the police department that deals with the wellness of officers, and part of that, you may not believe this, but is yoga. People respond differently to different things, whether it's faith, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, and so if you want to connect with me afterwards, there may be an opportunity to do that within our wellness unit.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jasmine Morris. I'm president of the Ross Foundation. We really actually focus on 42nd and Post, as both the founder and myself grew up in Brentwood. So I lost my phone in the back. It's a LG phone with a blue case with a crack in the corner. So if you found that, please, thank you, got it, okay.
That was the question.
secondly, and this is more towards Shauna, especially since the connection to 42nd and Post area, you had mentioned that the beautification portion, right? So organizations like the Ross Foundation, we're going out and we really believe that two things. If people can come together, or if they feel united and they have that collective being to say, okay, I care about, if I see a strange car coming up the street, I know they don't belong here and I'm gonna be alert about it, or I know that those kids don't belong over there, right? When you have that type of unity, then you start coming together to actually enforce change. A part of that and is getting people together, but the other side of that is the beautification of the neighborhood. So one of the examples I have, we do a community cleanup from time to time, and we're, have people picking up trash. 42nd and Post gets bad, and we had somebody shout to us, ain't no point in cleaning up the hood, right? There are tons of bus stops over there, but no sidewalks. There are, police cameras, but the street lights are iffy when you get past, closer to 42nd and Post, and then no telling what's in those trees. So there's that beautification portion of, yeah, it's great to put up street lights and make it look better. And I think that's awesome, because you can't tell a kid, hey, we're going to take you out of the neighborhood to take you somewhere else and then bring you back to the same condition. But my question to you would be, how do we start the beautification of the neighborhood and bringing in opportunity? Like, how do we create those opportunities in the neighborhood so we don't have to pull the kids out? Because right now you got to take a kid out of 42nd and Post to do anything. But then how do we start beautifying that neighborhood and providing opportunities in the neighborhood, but not change the neighborhood to where we're like borderline gentrification?
Good question.
Great question. And nice to meet you. I'll be out there with you guys on Saturday for the walk. I think that, it's important to get the organizations that are in that group to gather as a place to gather to strategize where we're going to start, first of all, right? For that area, 42nd and Post, is not just that corner. It's a lot of that, area to that. So no, gentrification is not the answer, but I think I was speaking more along the lines of a safer feel. I grew up in Three Fountains right there, so it's been kind of rough for a long time. And I just think that I just use that as an example of cleaning up the neighborhoods, because again, there's a broken window theory, right? Where if people look in their neighborhood and see that it is ugly and is trashy, that they treat it that way. And if the people in the neighborhood, come out to clean up, you guys are out there, so I'm gonna, partner with you to get your neighbors involved. And let's get out there and just do it. We can get some trash bags, we can go out there and we have to start somewhere instead of just keep talking about what we need to do. And so that's my point, is we've got to just start and just do it. So I don't know if I answered your question thoroughly, but I think that I'm looking forward to coming out and talking more with you guys on Saturday.
In the essence of time, we're asking that you get to the questions. That will help us get more people in before 8 o'clock. So we appreciate the stories and that you're sharing, and all those are important, but we need to get to the question as quickly as we can.
What I wanted to ask real quick is two-pronged. First, I would hope that we would incorporate, at least as it relates to youth, emotional intelligence and the underdevelopment of conflict resolution based on lack of emotional intelligence. That is a fundamental problem with children in certain communities, and we sometimes in privileged communities don't understand that children don't have a developed cognitive or the thinking part of the brain because of underdeveloped schools and improper lack of education of teachers in those schools. They don't teach the children or they don't stimulate the brain growth in the thinking part of the brain, as opposed to living in communities where the emotional part of the brain is overstimulated. And when you have that, it's very easy as your conflict resolution de facto skill to violence. And when you combine that with access to weapons, you have a recipe for disaster. So I would hope that that would be included. And one thing real quick, don't snatch it from me, Kendall, I'll be quiet. We haven't heard, Shauna, I'm more interested, you haven't talked a lot, and I was hoping to hear more about you as the violence director, your plan, and specifically the uncomfortable part, which is going to be holding organizations accountable who aren't doing things, who continue to get funding, but aren't doing anything and aren't doing the things that they claim that they say they're doing, okay? It doesn't take $500,000 to buy a bunch of fluorescent vests. And I would hope that you would address that. That's number one. And then I would hope that you would also be willing in your position and that you have the ears and the eyes of the media and everybody else to speak truth to power as it relates to systemic barriers in these communities that keep people in a position where it feels like they have no other alternative but to resort to violence.
Come on, Rashad.
Very good. Thank you for your question. So I do have a few things I want to discuss about our strategies and how we want to move forward and some of the key pillars, and for the essence of time, I'll make it quick. What we want to do is we're looking for community mobilization, intervention, prevention, enforcement with the law enforcement, but also what you said, Brashan, is really critical. And, you know, I'm not a proponent of people getting money just to get money to sit on it and not do nothing. I want people, and that's what our peacemakers and myself come in at with this grant piece, is there's going to be accountability. And there's going to be measures that we're not giving everybody the money all at one whop, okay? It'll go in disbursements. But it has to be, show me the money in what you're doing. I don't want a report that says, oh, we gave out bus passes XYZ. Okay, that's nice. What are you doing for what you said, emotional intelligence? What are you doing for leadership skills? What are you doing for these kids and teaching them how to navigate where they are and still come out and be okay? It's important to me that people don't, the regular suspects, get this money. That's why I told the lady behind you, Ms. Triplett, that I want the grassroots people that don't get the opportunity to get the money that United Way gives out, or other big organizations that give out, because I want to see something different, not what we see all the time. I don't want to hear the lip service. I want to see the work. Let's walk the walk and stop talking the talk. So I'm looking for citizens like you to be involved, to keep it honest, and to keep, you know, what you hear and what you do it, you have a lane that you're in. I want to partner with people like you, because I think it's important that we don't get snowed in on this thing. If it's not working, I'm going to tell you that like this. I have no problem cutting somebody off and restarting the RFP process to get the money where it's going to do some good. So I hope that answers.
Can I add to that real quick? Shauna doesn't know this, but Councilor Maggie Lewis last year applied for some technical assistance through the National League of Cities around young people, right? So that 18 to 24, we always talk about juveniles, but we know that the brain isn't fully developed until around the age of 24. And so we met with several other cities and talked about what Indianapolis is doing and what Indianapolis can do. San Francisco has a young adult court. And so how do you start addressing those 18 to 24? And we just heard the stats about you know, the property crimes and the violent crime. In our jail today, I think it's 20% of the population of the jail is between those ages of 18 to 24, yet it's 9% of the population. So like Mr. Woodson said, and like you said, in this conflict resolution, we see the violence around. That's the first thought, right? They don't know how to handle it. They pull that gun, and before they know it, they've made a decision that's going to impact them and everybody else for the rest of their lives. So point taken, and but I wanted to reassure you there are those thoughts, and we're working towards that. So we'll have a year of technical assistance to see what other agencies and cities are doing around that emotional intelligence.
And one last thing, we also have to build capacity for the organizations that are going to be involved with this initiative. So if they don't have a piece, we have to teach it to them and help raise them up to the bar that we can be proud of the work that they're doing if there's a piece that they're missing. So that program evaluation is going to be a critical piece.
Well, Chief, thank you very much for your passion. Ms. Majors, congratulations, and we look forward to working with you. Our guests from out of town, thank you for sharing those experiences. I'm Jose Lucende. I will be starting on July 9th as the new VP for Strategy and External Relations for the Indianapolis Recorder, your local newspaper here. And we want to be the convener of the collaboration conversations that I heard one of the panelists say, or actually Dr. Webster mentioned it earlier, so that what we study here doesn't get lost. We studied something here, and I believe we have more people who want peace than the minority that's causing us all the difficulties we have. And how can we collaborate, bring all the forces and the factors in the community to eradicate, not to reduce, I saw violence reduction, no, to eradicate. This can go out, as we heard from Mr. Woodson. Some places it has gone out, and we can do it here. Let's reclaim our community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Boyd with Drummer Indy. One of the things that I work with youth when we do community-based projects, employ them. One of the things that we hear from them about is what's happening in their schools, particularly around suspensions and expulsions. What are we doing to break this school-to-prison pipeline as a city? And what are your thoughts about really trying to engage that process so that we have fewer folks, youth coming out and engaging in activities that are dangerous and tragic?
Let me just say to you that what we're addressing the problem in Milwaukee by changing the youth culture itself so that the kids do not engage in activities that gets them suspended. And as a result, we have about a 40% drop in expulsions. Suspensions are down. But we have young adults working with the students every day in the schools, acting as advocates, but also moral mentors to them. And so we redirect their behavior so that they don't get suspended, and it's working. So part of it has to be changing what the young people do. The other is changing what the school does. But it has to be a shared responsibility, and the young people do that. We've gone from Pulaski High School, used to be run by 8 gangs. It used to be the most dangerous. It is now the safest school in the city. But that's because we changed the culture of the young people themselves.
Dr. Stuckey, one more. One more, and this will be it.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Crane, and I'm from Hogville Strong Neighborhood Association, and I'm also a member with Southwest District Resource Council. Chief Rodney, you said something earlier that I think I need to push back on. You made a comment that said IMPD can't do everything when dealing with trauma. I don't think the community is asking IMP to take on everything, but I do think the community is asking for the police to take accountability in the role they play when dealing with the trauma in the community. My question to IMPD is, how many, if any, community-oriented policing agreements do you currently have with neighborhoods in Indianapolis? If none, then we need to talk, because that's where the conversation starts, accountability on both ends.
Well, before you answer, Chair, I just want to, and I appreciate your comment, but I wasn't saying that IMPD or any police department should not have a role in helping to reduce or addressing trauma in youth. In both the last 2 departments I had, we had a team, and it wasn't police. We had partnered with our social service division that any violent act in which a young person either was a victim, a witness, or a family member, we had a team of people that came out that met with that youth during that particular encounter, follow up with that particular youth. So I think it is critical to help identify the resources that are needed to address trauma amongst our youth, but again, not necessarily a police officer. I think you know, some of the training that we're trying to provide our officers in critical incident management as it relates to recognizing issues of trauma, recognizing issues of conflict and how to better prepare our officers for dealing with those type of things. I think that is important. I think that's a role that police need to continue to take on.
So along those lines that Rodney was talking about, we too have a victim assistance unit that is connected to our investigations unit that reaches out to those families. Those CRDCs were created for exactly what you're just talking about. You know, they're not, those CRDCs are not run by me. I think it was pretty apparent at the beginning that it should be autonomous. It's you and others that feel like and should feel like that's our community, and you should be telling us how you want to be policed. So glad to come to Southwest and talk about what does Southwest want and what are those needs and what kind of accountability do you need from us. Glad to do that.
Thank you to all of those that asked questions. I'm going to borrow the mic here for just a second. There were some things that I heard that were interesting themes that I think actually rang throughout. And one of the things that is interesting to me to listen to is that very clearly there are portions of the community that are disproportionately bearing the weight of that trauma of violence. And it's quite clear that that pain is something that we have to always be aware of and continue to work. And there is no acceptable amount of violence. So regardless of where we take this is the thing that we always have to keep directly in mind, is that there's no acceptable level of violence. And I think that certainly all the panel would agree with that. The other thing I think is interesting is that, you know, as I heard Mr. Woodson and others talking about relationships, and it struck me that that's the realization of human potential. That when you have those relationships and you see that individual and you're asking them, is this really what you want to do with your life? You're seeing that person as someone who has potential, not as a statistic, not as a heroin addict or whatever it would be. I think more and more, I think those relationships that you talk about are the things that and story after story that I hear, the thing that is impactful in changing someone's life is to make that connection where someone sees the value in something or in a person. And so we have to figure out how to build that capacity in communities. The other thing that I heard Mr. Woodson say that I think is really critical is that happens from the inside out. It does not happen from someone like me saying this is what you need in your community. It happens when we get together and have that conversation. So my pledge to you all is that this is just the beginning, or this is just another stage in this conversation. So for those of you that are looking for technical assistance in how to write grants, Professor Carter and I write for a living, so we could certainly help you out with some of that. I'm more than happy to do that. Again, I think that this is the value of these is to start these conversations or to get these conversations continuing, but we need to continue to think about what are the next steps to make that a reality. And so I'm glad to have Shauna Majors now being able to take the lead on some of these conversations, and we're gonna have some additional conversations. I'd like to have more events like this over the coming months because we know it's not going to change overnight. So let's thank our panelists. And we thank you all for coming out tonight. Again, we know we weren't going to solve this problem tonight, but I think we had a valuable conversation about it, so thank you very much.